At one time in my life, the appeal of a film like The Bourne Supremacy was its professed seriousness. There was a tone to the film which made it appear as though to 11-year-old me that this was a very grown up and adult movie, and that, I just envied seemingly this world of being like a cool, sophisticated adult doing whatever you want. And you sit down and you're watching the Supremacy, and you're just analysing everything about it, and you know what everything that it's referring to, and you get all this stuff that you're not getting in your 11, and it's like, geopolitical or geographical or whatever, socially, culturally, but ultimately it's the kind of film which makes adulthood seem perhaps more exciting and interesting than well, not that it was, but I suppose we all thought that the kind of fairly comfortable environment of pre-GFC 2000 would last forever in a way. I look at I watch The Bourne Supremacy now, and it stands to me as possibly the most likable of the three films. And I love the photographic sheen of this one. I think Paul Greengrass's direction is really strong. I don't think it goes too far in the direction of the shaky cam. I think the Bourne Ultimatum maybe went a bit far in that direction. There's what the Bourne Supremacy has going for it is insofar as the Paul Greengrass weariness that particular style, which puts a lot of people off. It's very pronounced in one particular hand-to-hand combat scene in the Bourne Supremacy, and I actually think it's quite well done there, with the problem being that the sound effects are too loud and they sound a bit comical. Otherwise, we could talk about the film's plotting if we want to. It's probably not perfect, it's probably not airtight. Although what we have, it's just the tone of this man, kind of like going around Berlin trying to figure out this mystery, and then there's a kind of CIA conspiracy going on. They ground it in as much reality as possible. They try to make this narrative as plausible as possible. Other characters kind of sniff out the discrepancies of an official story. There's always a tone of kind of grimness and a great 21st century modernity about that. This is, by 2004, Supremacy demonstrates that we're firmly in a new cultural aesthetic. I think Matt Damon's look as Jason Bourne in this film was the best of the three pictures. I think the idea of just being the guy going around, the kind of psychologically innocent, although you're physically, your body has committed many great atrocities and assassinations, perhaps, although what your memories, the person that you are, it's ultimately, you perceive yourself as an innocent with a victim of circumstances via as a result of the amnesia at least. And so he's this paranoid Kafkaesque victim in the 21st century surveillance state, and he's cleverly finding all these ways to outwit them still. It's very brilliant watch in this respect, and doesn't go too far in the way that Ultimatum does. Everything that people think is brilliant about the Bourne Ultimatum, I think was brilliant about the Bourne Supremacy, rather. I'll go into more so in the Bourne Ultimatum video why I feel that film was a bit of a letdown, even though I think it was considered the best of them at the time, and a really amazing film at one time, people considered it. But instead, with the Bourne Supremacy, I think it's just this is going to sound so silly and superficial, but just the coolness of it. He's just going around, and he's, he can solve anything, he has all the answers, and yet he's this innocent victim in at least in this particular case. I think the cinematography is very involving and vivid. The nighttime photography feels very sleek and lived in, and yet there's a sense that this is operating in a kind of, it feels like it's operating in the, you're watching it at night and you're in the 2000s and you're imagining this is the sort of thing that could be happening somewhere in the world. In this case, Europe. I don't know if you're living in Germany, maybe this film doesn't feel like it's taking place in the real world. I wouldn't know. Or even just America, maybe. I'm not sure. Brian Cox is our main antagonist. He gets even more screen time in this film. There's a lot more of him giving his talks. What do you say next? We say this, but there are other options, Jason. It's up to you, although we all know that there isn't really much hovering over your choices. What'll it be? Choose wisely. It's the last time you can. I love the way how in the nighttime Jason Bourne's the outfit he's been clothed in this film. It really, yeah, he just blends in with the scenery. He's like a panther in the streets. He's just a, yeah, just this kind of mythological figure for the, this boogeyman to haunt this karmic kind of specter which haunts the activities of the hit squads of the American CIA. Very, very cool. And as he blends with his surroundings, he becomes one with reality. It's almost as though when the film invokes reality so vividly and so sharply, and then it inserts this kind of larger than life, kind of over the top action figure such as Jason Bourne, it makes it all seem so seamless and realized. I think it understands that it's really aesthetic and style that can make us believe that something's operating in the real world, rather than this kind of fastidious dedication to making something realistic, I guess, with a kind of editing philosophy, if you know what I mean, a particular, maybe a documentary-esque or non-narrative means of shooting a film, say if you're Mike Figgis or something like that, like Timecode, or staging some cinema verite, if shooting like a documentary, or a pseudo mockumentary of sorts. And another interesting way of incorporating reality into a film is to make the film appear to take place in reality as much as possible. You shoot a narrative film as though it just takes place outside. You let kind of action movie or genre or otherwise more radical, sensational occurrences take place within this environment, and you keep the camera as focused and as subdued and as reliant on emphasizing the action or the kind of the emotional relevance of every moment. I think when every particular frame within that shaky hand-to-hand combat sequence in that Berlin, Munich, I think it's Berlin, house where Bourne fights the former Treadstone employee, every shot, it's not to demonstrate what's happening so much as what it feels like to be one of the fighters one of the participants in that fight. There's a kind of it wants to demonstrate the disorientation and how they're perceiving the space around them in that moment. How an indie drama might feel like it's taking place outside, and it's manipulating the space around it in a manner that's not dissimilar to how a person would perceive the space or prefer to perceive the space in a kind of aesthetic ideal if they were standing or sitting, being amongst it. And I think the Bourne Supremacy operates under this principle as well. Now it also has to incorporate action sequences. Here's where it gets tricky, and this is why Paul Greengrass decided to utilize his style. Well, he was hired specifically, but why he felt confident that his style would work for this particular film and the next one, I guess, is that there's you could say it's not quite documentary realism or pseudo-documentary realism, rather. It's a focus upon subjective disorientation within the context of action sequences, but it places you enough within the player, and in this case Jason Bourne's enough of a competent assassin that he has some idea of what's going on even when he's under duress, that it can still give enough of an impression of what's going on in that moment. That may or may not have made any sense. I don't know if I'm being coherent sometimes. I need to sometimes maybe play back an earlier recording and see if that made any sense before I commence the next one. I don't know. The Bourne Supremacy is one of the most fun action films of the 2000s, if not because it makes you feel as little as an idiot as possible when you're enjoying what very well could be something of a dumb action film in disguise, perhaps. It's as shameless and earnestly admirable as a 2000s big budget blockbuster action Hollywood, farce of sorts is going to be, you could say. The film which really solidified Matt Damon's Jason Bourne as the premier action hero of the 21st century initially, of the 2000s in retrospect, was The Bourne Supremacy, to be sure.